Step aside, sir. Immigration
I'm
enforcement.
the captain on this flight. Here's my crew badge.
That doesn't verify citizenship. Documents now.
My FAA license is right here. I fly this plane.
Hands on the wall. Don't make this difficult.
I have 200 passengers boarding in 40 minutes.
There is a particular kind of betrayal that happens when a man who has spent 30,000 hours keeping Americans safe in the sky is told by his own government that he doesn't belong on the ground. On March 14, 2025, at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Captain Darren James Okafor, a 52-year-old senior airline captain with Continental Atlantic Airways, a man who had been entrusted with the lives of over 4 million passengers across 3 decades of flying, was detained, handcuffed, and held in a federal screening room for 2 hours and 43 minutes by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Kyle Braddock, who decided that a black man in a pilot's uniform standing at Gate B-27 with a crew badge, an FAA airline transport pilot certificate, and a company-issued flight manifest was somehow more likely to be an undocumented immigrant than the captain of Delta-coded Flight 1174 to Los Angeles. What followed, the witnesses, the recordings, the airline's intervention, the depositions that would later expose a pattern so damning that the Department of Homeland Security's own Internal Affairs Division would call it systemic and indefensible, would result in a $9.4 million federal settlement before the year was over. And it all started because one agent looked at a man's skin instead of his credentials. It was 5:34 a.m. on a Friday morning in Atlanta, Georgia, and the temperature outside Terminal B had already climbed to 61 degrees despite the sun not yet cresting the tree line beyond the east runway. Hartsfield-Jackson was doing what Hartsfield-Jackson always does at that hour, grinding through the controlled chaos of the busiest airport in the world with the mechanical efficiency of an operation that processes 275,000 passengers per day. The terminal floors were still damp from the overnight cleaning crews. The Dunkin' Donuts past security had just turned on its neon, and the first wave of business travelers were shuffling through TSA pre-check with the glazed look of people who had done this 300 times before. Gate B-27 was quiet. Flight 1174 to LAX wasn't scheduled to begin boarding for another 47 minutes, and the gate agent, a woman named Priscilla Dunn, who had worked Continental Atlantic's Atlanta hub for 11 years, was just logging into her terminal when she saw Captain Okafor walking down the corridor in full uniform, rolling his black Travel Pro flight case with the ease of a man who had walked that exact corridor thousands of times. She waved. He nodded. It was routine. It was supposed to stay routine. Before we continue, let me ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss stories like this. Because what happened next at Gate B-27 was anything but routine. Darren James Okafor was born on September 3, 1972 at Grady Memorial Hospital in downtown Atlanta, the second of 4 children born to James Okafor Sr. and Margaret Okafor, both naturalized U.S. citizens who had emigrated from Lagos, Nigeria, in 1965. His father worked 34 years as a mechanical engineer for Delta Airlines at their Atlanta maintenance hub, the same airport where his son would one day be handcuffed. His mother taught biology at Benjamin E. Mays High School for 27 years. Darren grew up in the Cascade Heights neighborhood of southwest Atlanta, a historically black upper-middle-class community where doctors lived next to teachers and pilots lived next to attorneys. He attended Woodward Academy on a merit scholarship, graduated in 1990, and enrolled at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida, where he earned his Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Science in 1994. He earned his private pilot certificate at 17, his commercial certificate at 20, and his airline transport pilot certificate, the highest certification the FAA issues, at 23. He was hired by Continental Atlantic Airways in 1996 and spent the next 29 years climbing from regional first officer to wide-body captain. By March of 2025, Captain Okafor held type ratings on the Boeing 737, 757, 767, and 787 Dreamliner. He had logged 30,247 flight hours, the equivalent of 3 years and 5 months of continuous time in the air. He had completed over 14,000 commercial flights without a single safety incident, without a single FAA violation, without a single passenger complaint in 29 years. He had been named Continental Atlantic's Pilot of the Year in 2011 and again in 2019. He served as a check airman, the pilot who certifies other pilots, for the airline's 787 fleet. He was a member of the Airline Pilots Association and had served on their safety committee for 7 years. He had mentored 43 junior pilots through the airline's diversity pipeline program, 31 of whom were currently flying for major carriers. He had been married to Dr. Vanessa Okafor, a cardiologist at Emory University Hospital, for 24 years. They had 3 children, all of whom attended Spelman and Morehouse. He paid property taxes in Fulton County. He voted in every election since 1994. His father had retired with a Delta pension from the same airport where Darren now stood in handcuffs. Captain Darren Okafor was not a visitor to Hartsfield-Jackson. He was part of its DNA. Kyle Braddock was 34 years old, a GS-12 Enforcement and Removal Operations Officer with ICE, who had been stationed at Hartsfield-Jackson's Immigration Enforcement Detail for 3 years and 7 months. He had previously served 4 years with Customs and Border Protection at the Nogales, Arizona port of entry before transferring to Atlanta in 2021. His personnel file, which would later be obtained through discovery, contained 14 formal complaints filed between 2020 and 2025, 9 of them alleging racial profiling, 3 alleging excessive use of authority, and 2 alleging verbal intimidation of U.S. citizens. None of these complaints had resulted in disciplinary action beyond a single written counseling in 2023. His stop records, also obtained through discovery, showed that in his 3 years and 7 months at Hartsfield-Jackson, Braddock had initiated 312 immigration enforcement contacts in the domestic terminal, a section of the airport where passengers have already cleared security and where international arrivals are processed in an entirely different terminal. Of those 312 contacts, 247, 79.2%, involved individuals who were later confirmed to be U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. Of the 312 contacts, 289, 92.6%, involved individuals who were Black or Latino. His partner that morning was Agent Tessa Nolan, a 28-year-old officer who had been with ICE for just under 2 years. Nolan's file was clean. Her testimony would later prove more damaging than Braddock's. Terminal B at Hartsfield-Jackson operates under a comprehensive closed-circuit television system maintained by the Atlanta Department of Aviation's Security Division. The B concourse alone has 187 cameras, 23 of which are high-definition pan-tilt zoom units positioned at gates, corridor intersections, and security checkpoints. Gate B-27 falls within the coverage zone of 4 cameras. Camera B-27 North, covering the gate podium and seating area. Camera B-27 South, covering the jet bridge entrance and corridor approach. Camera Barrero, Corridor 14, a wide-angle ceiling unit covering the 60-foot corridor leading to the gate. And Camera B Checkpoint 3, positioned at the nearest security re-verification station. All 4 cameras record continuously in 1080p resolution, with embedded timestamps synchronized to the FAA's National Airspace System clock. On the morning of March 14, 2025, all 4 cameras were operational. Every second of what happened at Gate B-27 was recorded from multiple angles. There would be no dispute about what occurred. The only dispute would be about why. The footage from Camera B Corridor 14 shows Captain Okafor entering the corridor leading to Gate B-27 at 5:36 a.m. He is in full Continental Atlantic uniform. Navy blue jacket with 4 gold captain's stripes on each sleeve, airline wings pinned above the left breast pocket, company crew badge clipped to the jacket's right chest pocket, with a photo visible even on the security footage. He is rolling a regulation crew flight case with his left hand and carrying a black leather flight bag over his right shoulder. His gait is unhurried. He has walked this corridor for 18 years. At 5:37 a.m., Agent Kyle Braddock appears in the lower right corner of the frame, walking quickly from the direction of the B checkpoint area, with Agent Nolan approximately 10 feet behind him. Braddock intercepts Okafor at the midpoint of the corridor, approximately 40 feet from the Gate B27 podium. The footage shows Braddock stepping directly into Okafor's path, holding up his left hand in a stop gesture while his right hand rests on his belt near his radio. Okafor stops. He sets his flight case upright. The exchange begins. Braddock speaks first. He tells Okafor to step aside for an immigration enforcement check. Okafor responds calmly that he is Captain Darren Okafor, the pilot in command of Flight 1174 to Los Angeles, and reaches for the crew badge clipped to his jacket. He unclips it and holds it out. The badge displays his full name, employee number, the Continental Atlantic logo, the word captain in bold type, and a photograph matching the man holding it. Braddock does not take the badge. He does not look at the photograph. The footage shows him shaking his head and saying something while gesturing toward the wall. Okafor does not move to the wall. He reaches into his flight bag and produces a second form of identification: his FAA Airline Transport Pilot Certificate, a federal credential issued by the United States government that confirms the holder's identity, citizenship status, and authorization to operate as pilot in command of commercial aircraft. Braddock pushes the certificate back toward Okafor without examining it. He repeats his demand. Okafor tells him that he is a United States citizen, born in Atlanta, Georgia, and that the documents in his hand prove both his identity and his authorization to be in this terminal. Braddock responds that a crew badge and a pilot certificate do not constitute proof of immigration status. This is technically true in the narrowest possible sense and functionally absurd. The FAA does not issue airline transport pilot certificates to individuals who have not undergone federal background checks, including citizenship verification, through the Transportation Security Administration's vetting process. Every airline captain in the United States has been vetted by the TSA, the FBI, and the FAA before they are permitted to sit in a cockpit. Braddock either did not know this or did not care. He tells Okafor to place his hands on the wall. Okafor does not comply. He tells Braddock he is going to reach into his flight bag for a third form of identification: his U.S. passport, which he carries on every trip as standard crew documentation. Before he can retrieve it, Braddock grabs Okafor's left wrist, spins him toward the corridor wall, and pushes him against it. Agent Nolan steps forward. The footage from camera B27 South, which captures the scene from a wider angle, shows Nolan's hand come up briefly as if to intervene, then drop back to her side. She does not speak. Braddock applies handcuffs to Captain Okafor at 5:41 a.m., 4 minutes and 12 seconds after the initial contact. The captain of Flight 1174 to Los Angeles, a man who had flown 30,247 hours for his country's airline system, was now handcuffed against a wall in the airport where his father had worked for 3 decades. The first witness to intervene was not a fellow pilot or an airline executive. It was a 23-year-old gate agent named Deshaun Harris, who had been restocking the printer at Gate B26 and heard the commotion. Harris walked around the partition, saw a man in a full captain's uniform being handcuffed by an ICE agent, and immediately said, loud enough for the corridor microphone to capture, "Yo, that's Captain Okafor. He flies the LA flight every Friday. What are you doing?" Harris pulled out his phone and began recording. Within 90 seconds, 3 other Continental Atlantic employees had gathered. A ramp supervisor named Lucia Alvarez, who had just come up from the tarmac. A flight attendant named Kim Whitfield, who was part of Okafor's own crew for Flight 1174, and a maintenance technician who recognized Okafor from the crew lounge. Whitfield was the most direct. She walked up to Braddock and said, "That man is my captain. I have flown with him for 6 years. His name is on the flight manifest that was filed with the FAA 12 hours ago. You need to take those handcuffs off right now." Braddock told her to step back. She did not step back. She held up her own crew badge and said, "I'm the lead flight attendant on Flight 1174. He is the pilot in command. Call our airline operations center right now. Call the TSA Federal Security Director. Call anyone, but take off his handcuffs." Braddock radioed for additional support. He did not call the Airline Operations Center. He did not call the TSA. He did not check any database. He had Captain Okafor escorted to a federal screening room adjacent to the B Concourse security office at 5:48 a.m. The airline's response was immediate and furious. Priscilla Dunn, the gate agent at B-27, who had seen Okafor walk past minutes earlier, called Continental Atlantic's Atlanta Station Operations Center at 5:44 a.m. The SOC contacted the airline's director of flight operations for the Southeast region, Captain Reginald Foster, who was at his home in Buckhead at the time. Foster was on the phone with the TSA's federal security director for Hartsfield-Jackson, a woman named Sandra Chen, within 8 minutes. Chen dispatched a TSA supervisor to the B Concourse federal screening room at 5:56 a.m. That supervisor, upon arriving and being told that an ICE agent was holding a Continental Atlantic captain on suspicion of being undocumented, reportedly said, "Are you serious?" and demanded that Okafor be released immediately. Braddock refused, stating that the subject had not produced satisfactory documentation of immigration status and that only an ICE supervisor could authorize release. An ICE field office supervisor named Agent Patricia Morales arrived at the screening room at 6:14 a.m., 33 minutes after Okafor had been handcuffed. Morales examined Okafor's crew badge, his FAA certificate, his U.S. passport, which had been in his flight bag the entire time and which Braddock had physically prevented him from retrieving, and his Continental Atlantic employee identification card. She released him at 6:21 a.m. The handcuffs had been on for 40 minutes, but Captain Okafor was not released from the screening room until 8:17 a.m., 2 hours and 43 minutes after his initial detention, because Braddock insisted on completing a full 213 record of deportable/inadmissible alien form before release, a form designed for individuals in removal proceedings that had no legal basis for being initiated against a verified U.S. citizen. Flight 174 to Los Angeles departed 2 hours and 11 minutes late with a replacement captain. 194 passengers were delayed. 23 missed connecting flights. Continental Atlantic estimated the operational disruption cost at $340,000. Now here's the question I want you to think about. Should an ICE agent who has a 79% error rate on his stops, who ignored a crew badge, an FAA license, a U.S. passport, and the testimony of 4 airline employees, be allowed to continue carrying a badge? Drop your answer in the comments below. The footage of the encounter went viral before Captain Okafor was even released from the screening room. Deshaun Harris's phone recording, 4 minutes and 37 seconds of Captain Okafor in full uniform being handcuffed by Braddock while Kim Whitfield argues with the agent, was posted to Harris's personal Instagram at 6:02 a.m. and had 1.2 million views by noon. By 3 p.m., it had been picked up by CNN, MSNBC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Washington Post, and every major black media outlet in the country. By 6 p.m., it was the #1 trending topic on X under the hashtag Captain Okafor. Continental Atlantic Airways issued a public statement at 4:30 p.m., calling the incident an outrageous violation of our captain's civil rights and an unacceptable disruption to our operations, and confirming that the airline would provide full legal and financial support for any action Captain Okafor chose to pursue. The Airline Pilots Association issued its own statement by 5 p.m. calling for an immediate DHS investigation. Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia's 4th District, whose constituency includes much of southern DeKalb County near the airport, called for congressional hearings by the following Monday. On April 2, 2025, 19 days after the incident, Captain Okafor filed suit in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia Atlanta Division. His attorney was Adrian Calloway Pierce, a 47-year-old civil rights litigator and former federal prosecutor who had spent 8 years in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division before entering private practice in 2016. Callaway Pierce had successfully litigated 4 federal civil rights cases against DHS agencies in the previous 5 years, including a $6.2 million settlement against CBP in 2023 for the wrongful detention of a naturalized citizen physician in El Paso. The complaint named Agent Kyle Braddock individually, Agent Tessa Nolan individually, the Department of Homeland Security, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement as defendants. It alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable seizure, the Fifth Amendment right to due process, and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, along with claims under the Federal Tort Claims Act for false imprisonment, assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint also raised a Bivens claim against the individual agents for constitutional violations committed under color of federal authority. Total damages sought were $18.5 million, $7.5 million in compensatory damages for lost wages, emotional distress, reputational harm, and the impact on Captain Okafor's ability to perform his duties, and $11 million in punitive damages reflecting the pattern and practice of Agent Braddock's conduct and ICE's institutional failure to discipline known misconduct. Discovery proved devastating. Braddock's complete enforcement record was obtained through subpoena, and the numbers were even worse than initial reporting suggested. Of his 312 domestic terminal stops over 3 years and 7 months, 289, the 92.6% figure, involved Black or Latino individuals. But the breakdown was more specific than that. 187 of the 312 stops, 59.9%, involved Black men between the ages of 25 and 60. In a domestic terminal, where no international arrivals are processed, in an airport where every passenger has already been screened by TSA, and where crew members undergo additional federal vetting that exceeds what is required of passengers. Braddock's success rate, defined as stops that resulted in identification of an individual actually subject to ICE enforcement authority, was 4.8%. 15 stops out of 312 resulted in actionable immigration encounters. That means 297 U.S. citizens and lawful residents were stopped, questioned, and in many cases detained by Agent Braddock over 3 years, and exactly none of them had been stopped based on anything other than visual assessment. No intelligence tips, no database flags, no coordination with airline security. Visual assessment. The 14 formal complaints in his file were also broken down. The 9 racial profiling complaints had been filed by 6 Black men, 2 Latino men, and 1 Black woman. 7 of the 9 were U.S.-born citizens. All 9 complaints had been classified as unsubstantiated by ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility, despite the fact that in 7 of the 9 cases, CCTV footage existed that documented the encounters. The footage had never been reviewed. Callaway Pierce described this in her motion for summary judgment as a filing cabinet of complicity. The deposition of Agent Kyle Braddock took place on June 18, 2025, in a conference room at the Northern District Courthouse. Attorney Callaway Pierce conducted the examination. The transcript ran 4 hours and 12 minutes. The key exchange occurred in the second hour. Attorney Callaway Pierce asked, "Agent Braddock, when you first made contact with Captain Okafor on the morning of March 14th, what was he wearing?" Braddock answered, "A dark jacket, dark pants." Callaway Pierce pressed, "Was it a uniform?" Braddock said, "It appeared to be some kind of uniform, yes." "Did the uniform have any insignia?" "I don't recall specific insignia." "You don't recall 4 gold stripes on each sleeve?" "I may have noticed stripes." "And the airline wings pinned above the left breast pocket?" "I don't recall wings." Captain Okafor held out his company crew badge, a badge with his photograph, his name, his title as captain, and the Continental Atlantic Airways logo. "Did you examine that badge?" "I glanced at it." "Did you read the name?" "I don't recall reading the name." "Did you look at the photograph?" "I may have." "Did the photograph match the man standing in front of you?" "I don't recall making that comparison." He then showed you his FAA, Airline Transport Pilot Certificate, a federal document issued by the United States government. "Did you examine it?" "I looked at it briefly." "Do you know what an Airline Transport Pilot Certificate is?" It's some kind of pilot license. Some kind of pilot license. Are you aware that the FAA requires citizenship verification and a full TSA background check before issuing that certificate? I'm not familiar with FAA procedures. You're an immigration enforcement agent working in the busiest airport in the United States, and you are not familiar with FAA credentialing procedures for airline pilots? My training focused on immigration documents. Your training focused on immigration documents. Did your training include recognizing a United States passport? Yes, Captain Okafor had a U.S. passport in his flight bag. You physically prevented him from retrieving it by grabbing his wrist and handcuffing him before he could show it to you. Is that correct? I was securing the subject for safety. What safety threat did Captain Okafor present? He was not complying with my commands. He was reaching for additional identification. Identification you had demanded. You handcuffed him for attempting to comply with your own demand. Is that your testimony? Braddock paused for 11 seconds before his attorney instructed him not to answer. Callaway Pierce moved on. Agent Braddock, there were 4 Continental Atlantic employees who verbally identified Captain Okafor by name and by position within minutes of your initial stop. Kim Whitfield, a flight attendant, told you directly that she was a member of his crew and that his name appeared on the FAA flight manifest. Did you contact the airline to verify? No. Did you contact TSA to verify? No. Did you access any federal database, TECS, NCIC, IDENT, or any other system to verify Captain Okafor's identity or citizenship? I was going to do that at the screening room. But you handcuffed him first. You detained him first. You initiated a deportation form on a U.S. citizen first. You had 4 employees, a crew badge, an FAA certificate, and a passport within arm's reach, and you chose to handcuff a man in a captain's uniform in front of his own crew and his own passengers. Why? Braddock's attorney objected. But the damage was already in the transcript. The deposition of Agent Tessa Nolan took place 3 days later, on June 21, 2025, and lasted 2 hours and 47 minutes. It was, in many ways, more revealing than Braddock's. Callaway Pierce asked, Agent Nolan, when Captain Okafor showed his crew badge to Agent Braddock, did you see it? Yes. Could you see the photograph on the badge? Yes. Did the photograph match the man holding it? Yes, it did. When Captain Okafor identified himself as the captain of Flight 1174, did you believe him? Nolan paused. I thought it was likely he was who he said he was. Likely. The footage from camera B27 South shows you raising your hand as if to intervene when Agent Braddock grabbed Captain Okafor's wrist. Then your hand dropped. What happened? I deferred to Agent Braddock's judgment as the senior agent. Even though your own judgment told you he was likely the captain of the flight. Yes. Did you say anything to Agent Braddock at any point during the encounter suggesting he might be making a mistake? Not during the encounter, no. After the encounter? I expressed concerns to our field supervisor the following week. The following week, a week after a 30-year airline captain was handcuffed in his own airport, you mentioned it to your supervisor. Is that your testimony? Yes. That tells you everything you need to know about how institutions protect patterns. Nolan knew, she saw, she raised her hand, and she let it fall. Captain Okafor's own testimony was given on July 9, 2025, and the transcript runs 187 pages. The section that would later be cited in every media account of the case came near the end, when Callaway Pierce asked him to describe the impact of the incident on his professional and personal life. Okafor said, I have flown 30,247 hours for this airline. I have been trusted with the lives of millions of passengers. I have a federal license that says the United States government has verified who I am, where I was born, and that I am authorized to command an aircraft carrying hundreds of souls at 40,000 feet. And on March 14th, none of that mattered. None of my training, none of my record, none of my credentials, none of the uniform I was wearing, none of the crew who identified me by name, none of it was enough to overcome the assumption that a black man in an airport must be here illegally. That is a particular kind of hurt that no settlement check can fix, because the next black pilot who walks through that terminal, the next black doctor, the next black attorney, the next black engineer, they will walk through the same system that did this to me, and they will wonder if their credentials are enough. And the answer, based on my experience, is that they are not. Captain Marcus Webb, a 20-year Continental Atlantic pilot and president of the National Black Airline Pilots Association, testified that in a survey of 412 black commercial pilots conducted in the 60 days after the incident, 74% reported having been questioned or challenged about their identity or authority while in uniform at an airport. 74%. Dr. Vanessa Okafor testified that her husband had experienced difficulty sleeping, anxiety before departing for work, and what their family therapist described as hypervigilance, a need to carry every possible form of identification in triplicate, a compulsive checking of credentials before leaving the house that had never existed in 29 years of flying. Settlement negotiations began in August 2025. The Department of Justice, representing the federal defendants, conducted a risk assessment that projected a jury verdict in the range of $14 million to $22 million, based on the strength of the video evidence, the deposition testimony, the statistical discovery, and the national media attention. Defense counsel calculated that a trial would cost an additional $3.1 million in litigation expenses and would generate sustained negative coverage that would compound DHS's existing public relations challenges regarding immigration enforcement practices. The settlement was reached on September 29, 2025. The total amount was $9.4 million, $5.8 million in compensatory damages covering lost wages during the period Captain Okafor voluntarily took leave to participate in legal proceedings, emotional distress, reputational harm, and impact on his professional standing, and $3.6 million in punitive damages assessed against the individual agents and reflecting ICE's institutional failure to address a known pattern of misconduct. The agreement was signed by all parties on October 3, 2025. Payment was processed on October 17, 2025. Captain Okafor received the full amount by October 24, 2025. The incident, the lawsuit, the depositions, the settlement, and the payment, all within the same calendar year. Agent Kyle Braddock was terminated by ICE on October 10, 2025, 6 days after the settlement agreement was signed. His termination letter cited failure to follow established protocols for identity verification, failure to utilize available database systems, application of physical restraint without legal justification, and a documented pattern of enforcement contacts that reflect impermissible racial bias. He was the first ICE agent at Hartsfield-Jackson to be terminated for profiling-related misconduct in the station's history. Agent Tessa Nolan was suspended for 90 days without pay and transferred to a non-enforcement administrative role at ICE's Atlanta field office. Her suspension letter cited failure to intervene when a fellow agent's conduct violated established protocols and the constitutional rights of a U.S. citizen. The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General opened a formal investigation into ICE enforcement practices in domestic airport terminals on November 4, 2025, specifically examining the use of visual assessment as a basis for immigration stops in areas where all individuals have already been security screened. Hartsfield-Jackson implemented a new protocol requiring ICE agents operating in domestic terminals to consult TSA's secure flight database before initiating any enforcement contact with uniformed airline personnel, a protocol that Continental Atlantic's chief operating officer described as a rule that should never have needed to exist. The Airline Pilots Association negotiated an industry-wide memorandum of understanding with DHS establishing that uniformed crew members displaying valid airline credentials are to be treated with the same professional courtesy afforded to other federal credential holders, including law enforcement officers. Captain Okafor returned to active flying status on November 1, 2025, operating a 787 Dreamliner from Atlanta to London Heathrow, his first flight in 7 months. Continental Atlantic's ground crew at Gate E12 lined the jet bridge with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Welcome back, Captain." He used $1.4 million of the settlement to establish the James Okafor Senior Aviation Scholarship Fund, named for his father, providing full tuition to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for 2 black students per year in perpetuity. He donated $500,000 to the National Black Airline Pilots Association's mentorship program. He funded a $250,000 grant to the ACLU of Georgia's Immigration Rights Legal Clinic, and he continued to fly. Because that is what Darren Okafor has always done. He flies. On March 14, 2025, Captain Darren Okafor woke up at 4:15 a.m. in his home in Cascade Heights, kissed his wife, drove to the airport where his father had spent 34 years, put on a uniform he had earned over 30,000 hours in 3 decades, and walked to his gate to do his job. By 5:41 a.m., he was in handcuffs. By October 24th, he had a $9.4 million settlement. By November, he was back in the cockpit. But the settlement didn't change what happened in that corridor. It didn't erase the footage of a man in a captain's uniform being pushed against a wall in his own airport. It didn't undo the 40 minutes in handcuffs or the 2 hours and 43 minutes in a room designed for people being deported. It didn't answer the question that 74% of black airline pilots carry with them every time they walk through a terminal in uniform. And somewhere in Atlanta, in the corridor between Gate B26 and Gate B27, the cameras are still recording, and the next black captain is walking to his gate, and he is wondering whether 30,000 hours is enough. $9.4 million says it wasn't. If this story made you feel something, it should, because it's not over. These cases happen more often than you think, and this channel exists to make sure they don't disappear. Subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and turn on notifications so you're here when we bring you the next one. Because accountability only works when people are watching.